camera. Why are you towing my car? I was inside for 10 minutes
This
just
is a no
grabbing
parking
groceries.
zone. The sign is right there.
This
Your
is
car has to be
ridiculous.
relocated.
There's nowhere else to park. I was coming right
I hear you,
back.
but the rules.
August 15th, 2023. Detective Marcus Williams had 30 seconds to decide whether to draw his service weapon on an unarmed white woman screaming thief in his face. 23 years on the force. Clean record, spotless reputation. Karen Mitchell held her phone steady, recording every word, every breath, every bead of sweat on his forehead. She knew exactly what she was doing. "You stole my groceries," she shouted, pointing at the Whole Foods bags in his trunk. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said, "I know who you are." The video would hit 10 million views in 6 hours. CNN would lead with it. The mayor would demand answers, but what the camera captured wasn't theft. It was recognition. Two people who'd been circling each other for decades, finally face to face, the moment Marcus Williams realized his past had found him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus's hand hovered 3 inches from his holster. The parking lot felt like a stage under hot lights, every shopper within 50 yards turning to stare. Karen's phone never wavered, its black lens drinking in his every micro-expression. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, ma'am, me, you lying thief." Karen's voice cracked like a whip across the asphalt. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else, something desperate. "Those are my groceries you're stealing." Marcus forced his breathing to slow muscle memory from 2 decades of de-escalation training kicking in. But this felt different, choreographed. The way Karen positioned herself, making sure his face was clearly visible in the frame. The way she'd appeared the moment he'd started loading his car, as if she'd been waiting. "I have my receipt right here," Marcus said, reaching slowly toward his back pocket. Karen immediately screamed and stumbled backward. "He's going for a weapon. He's armed. Someone call 911. The crowd that had been casually observing suddenly scattered. A mother grabbed her toddler and ran toward the store entrance. An elderly man dropped his coffee, the cup shattering on the pavement. Marcus froze, his hand halfway to his wallet. In the distance, he could hear someone actually making that call, multiple someones. This was spiraling beyond recovery, beyond explanation. In 60 seconds, squad cars would arrive, and Marcus Williams, Detective Marcus Williams, would be standing in a Whole Foods parking lot explaining why a white woman was accusing him of theft. But Karen wasn't done. She stepped forward again, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow the phone would still catch. "I know what you did, Marcus." Ice flooded his veins. Not Detective Williams, not Officer, Marcus. 23 years ago. "I know what you did to my boy." The world tilted sideways. The grocery bags in his trunk, organic apples, grass-fed beef, the expensive coffee his wife liked, suddenly felt like evidence in a crime he couldn't name. Karen's face, which moments ago had seemed like just another entitled suburbanite having a public meltdown, rearranged itself in his memory. Mitchell, Karen Mitchell. David Mitchell. The kid with the scared eyes and the public defender who looked like she was 12. The kid who'd sworn he didn't do it, who'd cried when they'd found the drugs in his backpack. The same backpack Marcus had searched twice, coming up empty both times, until the third search when suddenly there it was. Enough heroin to guarantee a life sentence under Illinois' 3 strikes law. Marcus had been 29 then, ambitious, tired of watching dealers walk on technicalities while kids died in the streets. Just one little push toward justice, just one time. Except David Mitchell had been innocent. "You remember now, don't you?" Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I can see it in your eyes. The same eyes that looked at my baby boy and decided his life didn't matter." The sirens were getting closer. Marcus could see people filming from their car windows, phones pressed against glass. This was already everywhere, spreading like wildfire through social media. But Karen wasn't interested in the phones anymore. She was studying his face like a scientist examining a specimen. 20 years I've been waiting for this moment. 20 years I've been watching you, following your career, your promotions, your awards, your beautiful house in Winnetka with your beautiful wife and your beautiful reputation. Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Marcus Williams, hero cop, community pillar, the man who puts criminals where they belong. Karen's laugh was hollow as a gunshot. "Except sometimes you put the wrong people there, don't you, Marcus?" The first squad car rounded the corner into the parking lot, lights flashing but no siren. Professional response to a theft call. Marcus recognized the cautious approach. They'd canvass the scene, separate the parties, take statements. Standard procedure. What wasn't standard was one of the parties being a decorated detective, and the other being a woman who'd just admitted to stalking him for 2 decades. "Here they come," Karen said, raising her phone higher. "Your brother's in blue. Wonder what they'll think when they find out what's really on this video. What do you want?" "Justice." Karen's voice was steady as stone. "For my son, for every other boy you've destroyed, for every lie you've told, and every night you've slept peacefully while David rots in Stateville." The squad car pulled up 20 feet away. Marcus could see Officer Rodriguez behind the wheel. Good cop, young but solid. Someone who'd listen to reason. Someone who'd understand this was all a misunderstanding. Except it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an execution. Karen lowered her phone for the first time, but Marcus could see she was still recording. 20 years of planning had led to this parking lot, this moment, this perfect trap. "Smile for the camera, detective," she whispered as Rodriguez approached. The whole world's about to meet the real Marcus Williams. The video that would destroy his life had already begun uploading. If you're just joining us, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice. Tomorrow's chapter reveals the moment that changed both their lives forever. Officer Rodriguez's footsteps echoed across the asphalt like a countdown timer. Marcus watched the young cops approach. Confident stride, hand resting casually on his radio, the practiced scan of a professional assessing a situation. Rodriguez had no idea he was walking into the detonation of a 23-year fuse. The parking lot had taken on an unreal quality, like a movie set between takes. Abandoned shopping carts cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. A child's forgotten juice box leaked purple onto the pavement near Marcus's feet. The ordinary world continuing its ordinary business, while his life cracked apart at the seams. "Afternoon, Detective Williams." Rodriguez's voice carried the careful respect of a younger officer addressing a veteran. "We got a call about a disturbance?" Marcus felt Karen's eyes boring into him, waiting to see how he'd play it. Would he use his rank? Pull Rodriguez aside and explain this was all a misunderstanding between neighbors? In the old days, even an hour ago, that's exactly what he would have done. Professional courtesy, Blue taking care of Blue. But Karen had stripped away that luxury. She'd spoken David's name aloud, dragged that ghost into the blazing daylight of this suburban parking lot. Now every word Marcus spoke would be weighed against a different scale of justice. "Mrs. Mitchell seems to believe I took her groceries," Marcus said carefully. "I was hoping we could clear this up." Rodriguez looked between them, his young face struggling to process the scene. A decorated detective and a well-dressed white woman in what should have been a simple theft complaint. Except nothing about this felt simple. The tension in the air was wrong, too sharp, too personal. "Ma'am, would you like to file a report?" Rodriguez asked Karen. Karen's smile was radiant. "Oh, Officer Rodriguez. Yes, I'd very much like to file a report. Several reports, actually. I have so much to share with you about Detective Williams here." The way she said his name made Marcus's skin crawl, like she'd been practicing it in her mirror for years, perfecting the exact tone of disgust and satisfaction. He thought suddenly of Elena, probably at home right now preparing dinner for their quiet evening routine. Wednesday nights they usually watched cooking shows and planned weekend trips to farmers markets. Simple pleasures built over 17 years of marriage. Elena, who believed she'd married a good man, who kept newspaper clippings of his commendations in a scrapbook, who told her book club friends about her husband the hero cop with such obvious pride that it made other wives jealous. Elena, who had no idea that everything she loved about him was built on the foundation of destroying an innocent boy. "Detective?" Rodriguez's voice cut through his thoughts. "Your receipt?" Marcus reached for his wallet, movements deliberate and slow. The paper felt flimsy between his fingers, such a small thing to represent the difference between normalcy and disaster. But as he unfolded it, showing the itemized list of organic produce and free-range meat, he saw Karen's expression didn't change. She wasn't interested in the receipt, had never been interested in the groceries. "You know what's funny about evidence, Officer Rodriguez?" Karen's voice carried across the space between them like smoke. "Sometimes it tells a completely different story than what you expect. Sometimes what looks like proof of innocence is actually proof of something much, much worse." Rodriguez studied the receipt, then peered into Marcus's trunk at the bags that clearly matched the items listed. His confusion was evident. This should have ended the matter. Simple case of mistaken identity or mental health crisis. Ma'am, these appear to be Detective Williams' groceries. The receipt clearly shows. The receipt shows he paid for them, yes. Karen's phone was recording again, capturing Rodriguez's puzzled expression. But that's not the crime I'm reporting. The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Marcus could feel sweat beating on his forehead despite the October chill. In the distance, a leaf blower started up, drowning out the sound of his heartbeat hammering in his ears. This was it. The moment Karen had orchestrated with the precision of a master chess player. She'd drawn him into the open, surrounded him with witnesses and cameras, and now she was ready to make her real move. 20 years ago, Marcus Williams had destroyed David Mitchell to advance his career. Now Karen Mitchell was about to return the favor. The beautiful symmetry of it would have been admirable if it wasn't about to cost him everything he'd spent 2 decades building. His house in Winnetka, his reputation, Elena's trust, his pension, his freedom, his future. But mostly, he thought as Karen raised her phone higher, it was going to cost him the comfortable lie he'd been telling himself for 23 years, that sometimes good cops had to do bad things for the right reasons. Karen was about to prove that some bad things could never be made right, no matter how many years you spent trying to bury them. Then what crime are you reporting, ma'am? Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the practiced patience of someone who dealt with his share of confused complainants. Karen reached into her designer purse with theatrical deliberation, her movement slow enough to ensure every phone camera in the vicinity could capture the moment. When her hand emerged, it wasn't holding another device or a weapon. It was holding an envelope Marcus recognized with the sick certainty of a man watching his own execution. The paper was yellowed at the edges, worn soft from handling. The return address was barely visible, but Marcus didn't need to see it clearly. He knew what it said: Illinois Department of Corrections, Statesville Correctional Center. He knew because he'd been dreading the arrival of letters from that address for 23 years. I'm reporting evidence tampering, perjury, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, Karen said, each word dropping like stones into still water, all committed by Detective Marcus Williams on November 15, 2001, against my son, David Mitchell. Rodriguez's expression shifted from confusion to sharp attention. These weren't parking lot complaints anymore. These were federal crimes, career-ending accusations that would trigger internal affairs investigations, FBI involvement, media scrutiny that would peel back every case Marcus had ever touched. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus said, finding his voice though it sounded foreign to his own ears. Whatever you think you know. I don't think, Detective. I know. Karen opened the envelope with surgical precision, drawing out several sheets of paper covered in careful handwriting. Because my son spent 20 years documenting every detail he could remember about the night you framed him. Every inconsistency, every moment when the evidence didn't add up, every time his story was ignored, because who's going to believe a black kid from the projects over a decorated police officer? The world around them had taken on a crystalline quality, every detail sharp enough to cut. The way Rodriguez's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, the way Karen held the papers like they were holy scripture, the way Marcus could feel his carefully constructed life cracking apart with audible precision. David wrote this letter 3 weeks before he died in prison, Karen continued, her voice never wavering. Stabbed 17 times in the shower block at Statesville. Did you know that, Detective Williams? Did you know the boy you sent away for life died alone and afraid, still maintaining his innocence to anyone who would listen? The parking lot tilted sideways. Marcus gripped the edge of his trunk, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. David Mitchell was dead, had been dead, while Marcus was getting promoted, buying his house in Winnetka, sleeping peacefully beside Elena. David Mitchell had been bleeding out on a prison floor. Ma'am, I think we need to, Rodriguez started, but Karen cut him off. Before he died, David remembered something that had been bothering him for 20 years, but that he'd never been able to prove. She held up one of the pages, and Marcus could see diagrams drawn in pencil, careful sketches of a backpack, arrows indicating search patterns. He remembered that Detective Williams searched his bag twice that night. Twice it came up empty. But the third time, suddenly there was enough heroin to guarantee a life sentence. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? that it had been different back then, that the department was under pressure, that David had been in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong color skin, that Marcus had genuinely believed he was taking a drug dealer off the streets? None of it mattered now. The truth was carved into those pages in a dead boy's handwriting. David also remembered something else, Karen said, turning to a different page. He remembered that Detective Williams made a phone call after the arrest, a phone call to someone who wasn't his partner, someone who wasn't in the department at all. The envelope slipped from Karen's fingers, but she caught it smoothly, as if she'd practiced this moment 1,000 times. He remembered because it was so strange. Why would a cop need to call someone else right after making a good bust? Unless what? Rodriguez asked, though his voice suggested he already knew he didn't want to hear the answer. Unless the arrest was ordered by someone else. Someone with enough power to ensure Detective Williams's rapid rise through the ranks. Someone who needed a convenient scapegoat to close a case that was making the department look bad. Karen pulled out a final sheet of paper, this one different from the others. Official letterhead, police department memo. Marcus couldn't read it from where he stood, but he didn't need to. He knew what it said because he'd burned his copy 17 years ago, thinking he was safe, thinking the past would stay buried. David spent his last 3 weeks alive putting together a timeline, Karen said. Names, dates, case numbers, a conspiracy that goes all the way to the top of the Chicago Police Department. And now, thanks to this little performance, we have everything we need to prove it. She smiled at the cameras still recording from car windows and doorways, including a confession. The word confession hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle, but he forced himself to remain upright. Rodriguez was staring at him with an expression Marcus had seen 1,000 times before. The moment when a cop realizes the person they're looking at isn't who they thought they were. I haven't confessed to anything, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Mrs. Mitchell is clearly grieving and she's... Shut up. The words came out sharp enough to make Rodriguez flinch. Karen's composure cracked for just an instant, revealing something molten underneath. Don't you dare talk about my grief. Don't you dare stand there in your expensive clothes in your expensive neighborhood and tell me how I should feel about my dead son. Marcus glanced around the parking lot. More phones had appeared at car windows. A woman with a stroller had stopped 20 feet away, pretending to check her own phone while clearly recording. Every second this continued, the video was spreading wider, reaching more people who would see Detective Marcus Williams accused of framing an innocent boy. Rodriguez, Marcus said, trying to regain some authority. I think we need to clear this area. Get these people moving along. But Rodriguez didn't move. The young officer stood frozen, looking between Marcus and the papers in Karen's hands like a man watching a car accident in slow motion. His radio crackled with routine dispatch calls. Domestic disturbance on Oak Street. Fender bender near the train station. The normal chaos of suburban police work continuing while Marcus's world imploded. Officer Rodriguez, Karen said sweetly, would you like to see what Detective Williams is so afraid of? Mrs. Mitchell, please. Marcus stepped forward, then stopped when he saw Karen's finger hovering over her phone screen. One touch, and whatever she had planned would go live to her followers, her networks, her 20 years of careful preparation. David drew pictures, she continued, holding up another sheet. He wasn't educated past 10th grade, thanks to you, but he was smart enough to remember that you wore gloves during the first 2 searches but not the third. Smart enough to wonder why a cop would suddenly put on gloves unless he was about to handle something he didn't want his fingerprints on. Rodriguez's hand drifted toward his radio again. Standard procedure would be to call for backup, separate the parties, take formal statements. But there was nothing standard about this situation. How do you arrest a decorated detective based on accusations from a dead prisoner's mother? How do you ignore evidence that might prove the department had been covering up a frame job for 2 decades? My son was 19 years old, Karen said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 19 years old, working 2 jobs to help his grandmother pay rent. He'd never been arrested for anything more serious than jaywalking. But he was black, and he was convenient, and Detective Williams needed someone to take the fall for a case that was making his superiors look bad. Marcus closed his eyes, but that only made it worse. Behind his eyelids, he could see David Mitchell's face as clearly as if the arrest had happened yesterday. The confusion when they'd cuffed him, the panic when they'd found the drugs, the desperate way he'd looked at Marcus, pleading with his eyes for someone to believe his story. Marcus had looked right through him, had testified under oath that the search was clean, that David had been carrying enough heroin to supply half the South Side, had watched a 19-year-old kid get sentenced to life without parole, and felt nothing but professional satisfaction at a case closed. "You want to know what the real crime is here?" Karen asked Rodriguez, but her eyes never left Marcus. "It's not theft. It's not even the frame job, though God knows that's bad enough. The real crime is that Detective Williams has been sleeping peacefully in his beautiful house for 23 years while my baby boy counted down the days until someone stuck a knife in his ribs." Rodriguez finally reached for his radio, but his movements were uncertain. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I'm going to need a supervisor at the Whole Foods on Willow Road." "Rodriguez." Marcus heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. "This woman has been stalking me. She's mentally unstable. You can't take seriously the ravings of someone who what?" Karen's smile was razor sharp. "Someone who spent 20 years building a case against you? Someone who has documentation, witness statements, and physical evidence that will destroy not just your career, but everyone who helped cover this up?" She held up the official memo again, and this time Marcus could make out enough details to confirm his worst fears. Departmental letterhead, Deputy Superintendent's signature, orders that had come down from the highest levels of the Chicago PD to make the David Mitchell case disappear quietly and efficiently. Orders that Marcus had followed without question because he'd been ambitious and young and stupid enough to believe that justice was whatever his superiors told him it was. "Including a confession," Karen repeated, her phone camera capturing every twitch of muscle in Marcus's face. "Because that look, Detective Williams, that's the look of a guilty man." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus could hear his own breathing, shallow and rapid, mixing with the distant hum of traffic on Willow Road. Rodriguez's supervisor would arrive soon, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 if they were dealing with other calls. Not enough time to contain this, not nearly enough time to stop what Karen had set in motion. "You know what I realized during those 20 years? Karen's voice had taken on an almost conversational tone, which somehow made it more terrifying. "I realize that you never forgot my son's name. All those other cases you worked, all those other arrests, but David's name stuck with you. Want to know how I know?" Marcus said nothing. His throat felt packed with sand. "Because 3 years ago, you donated $15,000 to a scholarship fund for disadvantaged youth in Chicago. The David Mitchell Memorial Scholarship." Karen's smile was surgical in its precision, administered through St. Augustine's Church on the South Side, the same church where my son's funeral was held. The parking lot seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped his car door handle, remembering the sleepless nights that had led to that donation. Elena had praised him for his generosity, had told their friends about her husband's commitment to helping underprivileged kids. She'd never asked why he'd chosen that particular fund, and Marcus had never volunteered the information. "Anonymous donation, of course," Karen continued. "Made through 3 different shell organizations to hide the source. But I've spent 2 decades learning how to follow paper trails, Detective Williams. I've become very, very good at finding things people want to keep hidden." Rodriguez was staring at Marcus now with unconcealed suspicion. The young officer's training was probably screaming at him to separate the parties, control the scene, but this had moved beyond standard procedure. This was watching a man's entire life unravel in real time. The scholarship wasn't enough, though, was it? Karen pulled out another document, this one photocopied and highlighted in yellow. "Because guilty consciences are expensive things to maintain. That's why you also made donations to the Illinois Innocence Project, the Cook County Public Defender's Office, the Exoneration Initiative, all anonymous, all substantial, all trying to buy forgiveness for something that can't be forgiven." Marcus felt something break loose inside his chest. The careful compartmentalization he'd maintained for 23 years was crumbling, and behind it was a pain so sharp he could barely breathe. He'd told himself the donations were about giving back to the community, professional responsibility, a decorated cop supporting the system, all lies. He'd been paying penance for David Mitchell, trying to balance the scales with money because he was too much of a coward to balance them with truth. "You want to know what David's last letter said?" Karen's voice cracked for the first time, revealing the mother beneath the prosecutor. "He said he forgave you. Can you believe that? After 20 years in prison for something he didn't do, After watching his friends die and his future disappear, my baby boy said he forgave the man who destroyed his life. The papers in her hands were trembling now. He said he understood that you were young and scared and following orders. He said he hoped you'd learn to be a better man. He actually felt sorry for you, Detective Williams. Sorry for the burden you must be carrying. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, but tears leaked through anyway. He could see David's face again, but not from the arrest this time, from the trial. The way the kid had looked at him during his testimony, still hoping, even then, that someone would tell the truth, that Marcus would stand up and admit what had really happened. But you know what? Karen's voice turned to steel. I don't forgive you. I will never forgive you. And neither will anyone else when they see what's about to happen. She tapped her phone screen, and Marcus heard the chime that meant she was going live, broadcasting to however many followers she'd cultivated, however many people were about to watch a Chicago police detective confront his past in a suburban parking lot. Rodriguez, you need to stop this, Marcus said desperately. She's interfering with a police officer. She's creating a public disturbance. But Rodriguez had gone pale, his hand frozen halfway to his radio, because he understood now what Marcus was just beginning to grasp. This wasn't about grocery store theft or public disturbances. This was about a woman who had spent 20 years building a perfect trap, and a cop who had just walked into it. Tell them, Detective Williams, Karen said to the camera, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had already won. Tell them about the night you planted drugs on my son. Tell them about the orders you followed. Tell them about the conspiracy that goes all the way to the top. She stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could see his own reflection in her phone screen. Tell them the truth. Marcus stared into the black eye of Karen's phone camera, seeing his own face reflected in the screen. 23 years older, weathered by guilt he'd never fully acknowledged. The live stream counter in the corner was climbing. 847 viewers, 1,203, 1,891, each number representing another person watching his world collapse in real time. The truth, he whispered, the words tasting like ashes. You want the truth? Marcus, don't, Rodriguez said quietly, but his voice carried no authority. The young officer understood he was witnessing something far beyond his pay grade. But Marcus wasn't looking at Rodriguez anymore. He was looking past Karen, past the phones recording from car windows, into a memory he'd spent 2 decades trying to bury. Deputy Superintendent Kowalski's office, the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes, the way the afternoon light had cut through the blinds in sharp angles. Detective Williams, Karen prompted, her voice honey-sweet for the live stream audience. Tell them about the phone call you made after arresting my son. The memory crystallized with brutal clarity. The payphone outside the precinct, because cell phones weren't everywhere yet, and Kowalski had been paranoid about departmental lines. The number Marcus had memorized and never written down. The conversation that had lasted less than 90 seconds but changed everything. I called my supervisor, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. Deputy Superintendent Thomas Kowalski, just like I was supposed to. Karen's smile was triumphant. And what did Deputy Superintendent Kowalski tell you, Detective? Marcus closed his eyes, but the memory played behind his eyelids like a movie reel. Kowalski's gravelly voice cutting through the static. Good work, Williams. Clean arrest, solid evidence. This one's going to make careers. Except it hadn't been clean. Marcus had known that even then. The heroin had appeared like magic during the third search, right where Kowalski had said it would be. Right where someone had planted it before Marcus ever touched David Mitchell's backpack. He congratulated me, Marcus said, opening his eyes to find Karen's camera still rolling. The viewer count had passed 5,000. He said I'd done exactly what was needed. And what was needed, Detective Williams? The question hung in the air like a noose. Marcus could feel Rodriguez's stare boring into him, could sense the other phones recording, could hear his own heart hammering against his ribs. Everything he'd built, his career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life in Winnetka, balanced on the edge of this moment. A conviction, he said finally. The department was under pressure. There had been 3 unsolved drug-to-related homicides in 6 weeks. The media was calling us incompetent. We needed someone to go down for it. Even if that someone was innocent, it wasn't a question. Karen's voice carried the weight of 20 years of certainty. 20 years of watching her son waste away in a cage while his real crime was being young and black, and available when the Chicago PD needed a scapegoat. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The careful lies he'd told himself, that David had probably been guilty of something, that the system had needed him off the streets, that Marcus had just been following orders, crumbled like ancient paper. "I knew," he whispered, and the admission felt like stepping off a cliff. God help me, I knew he was innocent. The live stream viewer count hit 10,000. Rodriguez took an involuntary step backward, as if watching a man catch fire. Somewhere in the distance, sirens were getting closer. Backup that would arrive too late to stop the confession now spilling out of Marcus like blood from an arterial wound. "David was clean when we arrested him," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength even as his world disintegrated. "The first 2 searches turned up nothing. I called Kowalski from the squad car, told him we had the wrong kid. You know what he said to me?" Karen's eyes glittered with 20 years of vindicated rage. "Tell them," he said. "Make it right, Williams. Your future depends on it." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "So I did. I planted the heroin during the 3rd search. Enough to guarantee a life sentence. Enough to close 3 murder cases we couldn't solve any other way." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the distant traffic seemed to pause, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Rodriguez's hand moved unconsciously to his service weapon, though whether to protect or arrest Marcus wasn't clear. "And you never looked back," Karen said softly. "You testified under oath. You watched my baby get sentenced to die in prison, and you slept peacefully in your beautiful house while he counted down the days until someone murdered him." Marcus met her eyes, not the camera, but her actual eyes, and saw something there he hadn't expected. Not triumph, but exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a mother who had carried this weight for 2 decades and was finally setting it down. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it completely. "I am so sorry." Karen lowered her phone for the first time. "Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, Detective Williams." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "It doesn't." The sirens were closer now, maybe 3 blocks away. Rodriguez looked like a man caught between 2 trains, his radio crackling with increasingly urgent requests for his location. The livestream viewer count had climbed past 15,000, and Marcus could see other phones emerging from storefront windows, from passing cars slowing to gawk. "But sorry is a start," Karen said, her voice softer now but carrying a new kind of steel. "Because we're not done here, Detective Williams. David's death, that was just the beginning." She pulled out a manila folder from beneath the scattered papers, thick with documents and photographs. Marcus recognized some of the faces immediately: Deputy Superintendent Kowalski, Commander Hayes, Detective Lieutenant Morrison. All dead now, their secrets supposedly buried with them. 23 years, Karen continued. 23 years of following the money, tracking the connections, finding the other families. You weren't the only one, were you, Detective? David wasn't the only innocent boy fed to the machine. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Rodriguez stepped closer, no longer pretending this was a routine disturbance call. The young officer's eyes were wide with the terrible understanding that he was witnessing something that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his own department. "There were others?" Rodriguez whispered. Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. 7 that I can prove. 7 young black men arrested by Detective Williams and his unit between 1999 and 2003. All on drug charges that appeared like magic during final searches. All sentenced to life terms. 3 dead in prison, including my son. 4 still locked away in Statesville and Menard. She held up a photograph, Marcus in his dress blues at some long-forgotten department ceremony, shaking hands with then Mayor Richardson. Young and confident, his future bright with promise built on the backs of innocent children. "Tell them about Anthony Crawford," Karen said, pointing the phone camera at Marcus again. 17 years old. Arrested 2 months after David. Same pattern. Clean searches until Detective Williams found heroin in his jacket pocket. Marcus remembered Anthony. Small for his age, crying in the interrogation room, begging for his mother. The kid had been walking home from his job at McDonald's when they'd grabbed him. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color skin, when the department needed another conviction. "He died last year," Karen continued. "Stomach cancer, medical neglect, but his sister kept every letter he wrote, including the ones where he described Detective Williams putting on latex gloves for that final search, just like David remembered. "Mrs. Mitchell," Marcus started. "Dr. Mitchell," she corrected sharply. "I went back to school after David died. PhD in criminal justice from Northwestern. 20 years of learning everything about how the system failed my son, how it failed all of them. The sirens were on Willow Road now, maybe a block away. Marcus could see Rodriguez calculating distances, response times, wondering if he should arrest Karen for harassment or Marcus for, what, accessory to murder, conspiracy, crime so old they might be past the statute of limitations, but fresh as yesterday's wounds for the families still living with the consequences. The beautiful thing about social media, Karen said conversationally, is how fast information travels. Your confession is already being shared, detective. Copied, downloaded, preserved for posterity. No taking it back now. She tapped her phone screen, showing him the climbing share count. News outlets were picking it up. Hashtag Detective Williams' confession was starting to trend. In another hour, it would be national news. By evening, it would be international. You know what I told myself for 20 years? Karen asked. I told myself that if I could just get you to admit the truth, if I could just get you to say it out loud where the whole world could hear, maybe David could finally rest in peace. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. I was wrong. He's still dead. They're all still dead. But at least now everyone knows their names. 3 squad cars rounded the corner, emergency lights painting the parking lot in red and blue. Marcus recognized the lead vehicle. Sergeant Chen, a good cop who'd probably arrest his own grandmother if the law required it. Behind him, more units were arriving. The cavalry, 20 minutes too late to save anything that mattered. What happens now? Rodriguez asked, though he was looking at Marcus when he said it. Karen was already packing her papers away, movements efficient and practiced. Now Detective Williams goes home to his beautiful house and explains to his wife why their life is about to change forever. Now the families of 7 innocent men finally get to tell their stories. Now the Chicago PD gets to explain how this happened and who else knew about it. She stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that only he could hear her next words. Now you live with what you've done, she whispered, just like I've been living with it. The squad cars surrounded them like a closing fist, doors slamming as officers emerged with hands resting on their weapons. Sergeant Chen approached with measured steps, his weathered face unreadable as he took in the scene. The scattered papers, the phone still recording, the unmistakable tension of a situation already beyond containment. Williams? Chen's voice carried 20 years of working the same streets. What's the situation here? Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. Chen's suspicious gaze, Rodriguez's dawning horror, Karen's steady determination. The live stream continued rolling, viewer count climbing past 30,000. His confession was already beyond recall, spreading through the digital ether like wildfire. The situation, Marcus said slowly, is that I've been a liar for 23 years. Chen's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, but Marcus held up a palm. Let me finish, Chen. These people, he gestured to the phones recording from car windows, the pedestrians gathering at the parking lot's edge. They deserve to know what their police department really is. Karen watched him with the intensity of a hawk studying prey. This was her moment, the culmination of 2 decades of patient hunting. But something in her expression had shifted. The cold satisfaction was giving way to something rawer, more uncertain. Tell them about the quotas, she said quietly. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the monthly meetings in Kowalski's office. The charts on the wall tracking arrest numbers, conviction rates, departmental funding, tied directly to their ability to produce statistics that satisfied politicians and journalists. 5 arrests per month, minimum, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent parking lot. Drug arrests specifically, with enough evidence to guarantee conviction. The department was hemorrhaging money after the consent decree. We needed numbers that proved we were winning the war on drugs. Even if you had to manufacture the war, Karen finished. Chen stepped closer, his face pale. Marcus, you need to stop talking, right now. But Marcus was beyond stopping. The dam had broken completely, 23 years of suppressed guilt pouring out in a torrent that nothing could contain. Kowalski had connections everywhere. Judges who owed favors, prosecutors who wanted to climb the ladder, politicians who needed tough-on-crime statistics for their campaigns. We weren't just planting evidence, we were feeding an entire ecosystem of corruption. His phone buzzed against his hip. Elena, probably wondering why he wasn't home yet. How could he explain that home, everything they'd built together, was built on the graves of innocent children? The money, Karen said, her voice breaking slightly. Tell them about the money. Marcus felt something fundamental tear loose in his chest. Federal grants, asset forfeiture from the fake drug busts. Every planted baggie generated thousands of dollars in funding, money that paid for our overtime, our equipment, our pensions. Rodriguez stepped backward as if Marcus had become radioactive. The young officer's entire worldview was crumbling in real time, watching a decorated detective admit to crimes that would make headlines for months. David Mitchell's arrest alone brought in $47,000 in federal drug enforcement grants, Marcus continued, his voice steady now despite the tears. Blood money, that's what paid for my children's college tuition. Chen reached for his handcuffs, but Karen's voice stopped him. Wait! She lowered her phone for the first time since the confession began. There's more! From her folder, she withdrew a single photograph. Marcus recognized it immediately. Himself and Kowalski at the Fraternal Order of Police dinner 2003. Both of them smiling, holding awards for exceptional service. Heroes of the war on drugs. Deputy Superintendent Kowalski didn't act alone, Karen said. The corruption went all the way to the top. Mayor Richardson knew. Police Superintendent Collins knew. They all knew that arrests were being manufactured, that innocent people were being fed into the system to generate funding and statistics. She held up a thick stack of documents, email records, financial transfers, meeting transcripts, 20 years of investigation, and I can prove every connection. Marcus stared at the papers that contained the death warrant for everyone he'd ever worked with, everyone who'd benefited from the machine they'd built together, the mayor who'd become a senator, the superintendent who'd retired with full honors, the judges who'd sent children to die in prison while knowing the evidence was fabricated. They're all going down, Karen said simply. Every single one of them. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant traffic seemed muted, as if the entire world was processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Chen's hand trembled on his radio. Rodriguez looked like he might vomit. Marcus felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in 23 years, the weight was lifting from his shoulders. The terrible burden of secrets was finally shared with the world. What do you want from me? He asked Karen quietly. She looked at him with eyes that held 20 years of accumulated grief, and her answer was barely a whisper. I want my son back. But since I can't have that, she smiled, and it was sadder than tears. I want you to remember his name for whatever time you have left. Marcus nodded, feeling something profound settle in his chest. David Mitchell, he said, his voice carrying across the silent parking lot. 17 years old. He wanted to be a teacher. Karen's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face as she heard her son's name spoken with the reverence it had always deserved. 23 years too late, but spoken nonetheless. The federal agents arrived within the hour, their black SUVs looking out of place against Winnetka's manicured backdrop. Marcus surrendered without resistance, his hands steady as they cuffed him. The live stream had reached 2 million views. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Elena, his children, reporters who'd somehow gotten his number. He ignored them all. As they led him away, he caught Karen's eye one last time. She stood beside her car, looking older than her 62 years, but somehow lighter, as if she'd finally set down a weight that had been crushing her for decades. Thank you, she mouthed silently. Marcus understood. Not forgiveness, that would never come, nor should it, but acknowledgement. Recognition that her son had mattered, that his death hadn't been in vain if it could prevent others. The trials dominated the news cycle for 18 months. 7 former Chicago Police Department officials, 3 retired judges, and a sitting state senator. Marcus testified against them all, his conscience finally aligned with his actions. The families of the wrongfully convicted were awarded settlements totaling $47 million. It wouldn't bring their sons back, but it was something. Marcus pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations and received 12 years. At his age, with his health declining from decades of stress and guilt, everyone understood it was likely a life sentence. Elena divorced him quietly, keeping his name out of the proceedings. She'd loved the man she thought he was, not the one he'd actually been. His cellmate at the federal prison in Terre Haute was a former judge from the same conspiracy. Judge Morrison, who'd sentenced David Mitchell, spent most days reading legal briefs and maintaining his innocence. Marcus found his presence oddly comforting, a reminder that he wasn't the only one paying for their collective sins. The letters started coming after his first year inside. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Some were from the families he'd destroyed, filled with understandable rage that he read without complaint. Others were from current and former police officers, some confessing their own compromises, others threatening him for betraying the Brotherhood. But a few were different. A mother in Detroit whose son had been released after Marcus's testimony prompted a review of similar cases. A father in Memphis whose daughter's conviction was overturned when prosecutors could no longer rely on the testimony of discredited officers. Small victories, insufficient to balance the scales, but victories nonetheless. Karen visited him exactly once, 2 years into his sentence. She looked healthier than she had in the parking lot, her grief transformed into something more sustainable. She'd started a foundation, she told him, providing legal assistance to families fighting wrongful convictions. David's name is on a memorial now, she said across the prison visiting room table. 7 names. 7 young men who didn't have to die. Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. I don't forgive you, she continued, her voice gentle but firm. But I believe you're genuinely sorry. That has to be enough. She left without saying goodbye, and he never saw her again. The years passed with the measured rhythm of institutional life. Marcus read voraciously, taught literacy classes to younger inmates, and answered every letter that arrived. His health deteriorated slowly. Diabetes, heart disease, the accumulated toll of decades carrying secrets that had eaten him alive from the inside. He died in the prison medical facility on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 years into his sentence. The obituary in the Chicago Tribune was brief and factual, noting his conviction and death, without editorial comment. The comments section below filled with hundreds of responses, some celebrating, some mourning, most simply trying to process the complexity of a man who had been both destroyer and, eventually, truth-teller. At his memorial service, attended only by Elena and his estranged children, Karen Mitchell appeared unexpectedly in the back pew. She said nothing to the family, made no grand gestures. She simply sat quietly through the service, bearing witness to the end of a story that had consumed half her life. As the mourners filed out, she remained seated for several minutes, staring at the simple casket. Finally, she whispered something too quiet for anyone else to hear, then walked out into the spring sunshine. Later, when asked by a reporter what she'd said, Karen simply smiled, the same sad expression she'd worn in that Winnetka parking lot years before. I told him that David's name was still remembered, she said. That's all he ever asked for. The foundation bearing her son's name continued its work, a testament to the possibility that even the deepest wounds could be transformed into something healing. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but something approaching peace, justice, imperfect, but real.